our subject matter expert for tonight. Amanda Carr is a sports mental skills specialist over at the McKaylee Center for Sports Injury Prevention. She has a master's of education in sport and exercise psychology and also played basketball while in college, along with working directly with various collegiate teams throughout her graduate program. Um, she's actively pursuing her certification as a mental performance consultant, in working with athletes across all levels and abilities. Has a goal of meeting the athlete where they are and also helping to guide them wherever they want to go. So using a theory-driven approach alongside just her prior experience as an athlete, playing and working within the field, she loves to provide ways that athletes can add to their own mental toolkit to essentially improve both their athletic journey and performance, as well as their overall well-being. So I will hand it over to her, but everyone's in good hands.
Thanks, Molly. I appreciate it. And thanks, Jamie, for having me. I'm really excited to be here and kind of get started. So I'm gonna share my screen. So hopefully we could get this going and get this on the road. Jamie and Molly, can you see my slides?
Looks good.
Alrighty. So winning from within, unlocking mental skills to boost overall performance. So I'm really excited to talk to this group today and kind of give you guys a little spiel on what I love to do. I tend to geek out on this type of stuff, so I think everyone showing up today, for whatever reason it may be, and just showing a little bit of interest in the work I do, and hopefully taking some of this with you today. I love seeing that initiative from the jump, so I think this is a really important side to athletics in general. So kind of excited to get into that. My takeaways I'm really hoping that you guys can get from this is really figuring out what mental skills is, seeing where this can apply in your everyday life and your game, if you're a coach, if you're an athlete, what that looks like, and then applying it and seeing how that kind of help you in your overall performance. So here we go. So, a little bit about me. So, who's talking to you across the screen? So, I'm from Southern Connecticut in West Haven. Grew up there all my life. My athletic background starts as a gymnast. You guys can't tell, because we're on Zoom, but I'm actually 6'2", so I'm extremely tall. So, being a gymnast didn't work out too good for me. So then my dad finally said enough's enough and brought me to a basketball court, and that stuck ever since. So played basketball out of Bridgeport and Hartford for club ball, and then went to Springfield College to do my 4 years of undergrad. I got my health science degree, bachelor's of science, played 4 years there. Then apparently I couldn't get enough of Springfield and stayed two more to do sport exercise psychology. So I got my master's as well at Springfield. During my meantime, before coming to the McKaylee Center, I did a lot of work over the summer, doing virtual mental performance, which I'll get into what that is. Working with collegiate athletes from D1 to D3. While I was at Springfield, I worked directly with the women's lacrosse, field hockey, and basketball teams. So I was their mental performance coach on site. Um, and carrying over into the summer, like I said, I worked with all different sports. And then I was lucky enough to land at the McKaylee Center, where I've been there now for 4 months as the sports mental skills specialist. So I work primarily with youth athletes. So some college as well, but mainly the ages like 21 to I worked, I think, 10 being the youngest. So all different sports, all different backgrounds, which is really exciting for me. My why. So I always like to explain why I got into this work. I call it kind of me search. It's like research for me is kind of the reason why I got into it. Um, like Molly kind of mentioned, I was a basketball player at Springfield. I did my 4 years of undergrad, played all 4 years. Um, Sophomore year, everything was going perfect for me. I got captain right off the bat. I was playing full 40 minutes. If anyone's not familiar with how long a basketball game, it's a full 40 minutes. I was playing the whole game, which I loved. obviously, and averaging the points I wanted. Everything was going great. Then all of a sudden, I hit a performance slump and my shots weren't going in. I was in a really negative space. I started to not enjoy being at practice, and my performance reflected those emotions. So I went from full 40 minutes to 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, and none. And I had a real big, almost imposter syndrome of how I can be effective as a captain, but also not have that performance to kind of back my title on the court. Unfortunately for me, that kind of lasted the entirety of that season, and I couldn't really get myself out of that or navigate it. And junior year, I was really ready to start fresh and kind of find a new sense of self at basketball and kind of fall back in love with the sport. And then unfortunately, COVID hit for me. So junior year, I had my junior season taken away. But I always say it was a blessing and a curse for me because it gave me that step back that I never would have took and helped me realize that I still did love basketball and I wasn't ready to give it up. I still had unfinished business. So blessing and a curse, I was able to compete my senior year and kind of have a good cap and finish off strong. I went to the Sweet 16 with my team, which was awesome, and kind of get that closure I needed kind of with basketball. But um, I wish I had someone like myself kind of preaching some of these skills I'm going to talk about today with you guys. I didn't really know that there was this side of the game or someone that could help me during that time. So I kind of was stuck in that slump the entire time. So finding out about sports psychology, about mental skills and mental performance, I immediately picked up on it and was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And I want to help people kind of not feel alone in those issues and also prevent them from maybe getting to that point. And if they do get to that point, how do we get out of it? So that's a little bit about my why. So what is mental skills, which is a great question. And I didn't know myself until kind of diving into it deeper into my senior and grad school practice as well. But essentially, I work one-on-one with different athletes that may come to me with performance issues. What that would look like is maybe confidence, maybe it's performance anxiety, maybe it's motivation issues. You do really well in practice, but you don't know how to translate it to games. Maybe you have an issue with attention, so you could only focus on the crowd and not what's going on in front of you. Those are kind of the things in my wheelhouse. A lot of the athletes I work with at the McKaylee Center are injured athletes, because we are the Sport Injury Prevention Center. So, how do we still navigate when you're away from the sport and kind of the mental side in the mental game of it, is one thing you can work on besides the physical. Um, why to do mental skills? I think we stress so much, especially with the youth population, that you always have to, go to more practices, do strength and conditioning, do agility, and do all the physical side of the things, but we never really focus on the mental side, which is a really big game, especially for growing and developing athletes and the pressure that's now being put on the youth to match that athleticism and always be at your best, especially with recruiting processes as well. So I like to always stress that as much as we train our physical side, we should almost train our mental side more. So that's kind of my niche and where I fall into. One of the big discrepancies in my work is what is the difference between what I do and what mental health providers do. So mental skills, like I said, it's only in that sporting context. Sometimes it also carries on to school because some of the things you could take from what I teach and preach can kind of carry on to that as well. But it's strictly performance enhancement. It's not a therapy setting. We get that a lot because that one-on-one stuff kind of does look like it, but it's strictly just performance anxiety. I have a couple examples: performance anxiety, motivation, return from injury, kind of like I said on that last slide. The mental health side of it is kind of all areas of life. So when a problem kind of goes outside of just that sporting context, that's when it becomes that mental health professional. That would be anxiety, depression, dealing with trauma, eating disorders, something along those lines. And then they have that clinical focus. So that's kind of the difference between the two. I should have mentioned this on the last slide. I not only do one-on-ones with athletes, but I also do workshops with teams, which I really enjoy too, because I like to be with the teams, kind of in the environment. So if there's a topic with, multiple athletes in one group that, you see an issue coming between them all that they're all kind of sharing, I could kind of go and do a workshop on that issue. Maybe it's confidence or anxiety or something of that sort, and kind of helping them deal with that, or maybe it's dealing with stress to begin with. I also do that side of work of going with the teams and delivering a workshop as well. So, what am I teaching you today? So, these are my mental tools. So, I'm going to give you guys, whether you're an athlete or coach or anything in between, these are all in my tool bag. We call them the Canon skills in sports psychology. So, it's imagery, goal setting, arousal control, attention, and self-talk. They all kind of combine into each other, and you'll see that kind of as we go through. But these core concepts are really, really important to the mental side of the game. And I'm going to break through, kind of go through each one so you guys can kind of comprehend that. And then also give you tips on kind of what I do with my athletes using each skill that could hopefully help and translate over. So, time to teach the teachers. That's what I call when I try to give you guys the skills. So, implementing these into your game. So, the first one is one of my favorites. And when I was an athlete myself, I used to think imagery was a hoax. But then I learned all about it and I realized I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I do this when I was an athlete? So it is a mental rehearsal technique that involves using all your senses to imagine yourself performing a sport. It could be a sport specific, it could be a skill, it could be a situation that happens when you play. Imagery and visualization are kind of the two words that are interchangeable. You might also hear mental rehearsal, all the same things. So I put this example of Michael Phelps because a lot of the professional athletes swear by this technique, and I do too now, kind of learning about it and preaching it to my athletes. What does it help with? So it helps with preparation, overcoming obstacles, and just that rehearsal of skills, and kind of forming those positive outlooks from the jump. Whether you're not able to do them physically, you could start to mentally kind of create the scenarios. I use this a ton with my injured athletes because this is one of the things that's really cool is imagery unlocks the same neural pathways that it would if you physically were to go through a motion. So if I were to envision kicking a ball right now and physically kick a ball, in my brain, the same neural pathways would fire. So I always say to my kids when they're away from sport, if they're hurt or injured, that you can still get those reps in and kind of elicit the same feelings just by visualizing what you normally do, whether it's a routine, a performance, a specific skill, um, mentally rehearsing that while you're away from the game. So that way you could still be involved. So, how do we transfer this to the field, right? So, what I always say, if there's a new play that's given out, I always like to challenge my athletes to play it out and envision it before we even do it. And the reason why we do that is because one, it will help you more likely create a positive outlook, and then also help you kind of lock down on the skills and the positioning of where you want to be. If you're having a tough time with a certain skill, maybe, for soccer, maybe it's your juggling, maybe it's your passing, maybe it's just you're not receiving, you don't have a good first touch. Um, Envisioning you completing that skill positively, it starts to trick your brain into thinking that you can be successful doing that movement, and then your body should hopefully follow suit. One of the other things I like to do with imagery too is away games, right? It's a new field, it's a new environment, it's a whole lot of new. So sitting down and being grounded with it and envisioning kind of yourself playing out there, being successful, maybe the game plan that your coach gave you to begin with. Um, Maybe it's a certain matchup that you have, envisioning that to begin with and kind of priming your mind for it before it happens. Maybe it's a tough matchup and you know it's going to be a stressful game. Creating that scenario in your head and seeing it come out positively. You could also do this inversely too with struggles, right? Say none of your kicks are going in the back of the net where you want it, or your passes aren't going where you want to. Stopping and having a second and envisioning yourself getting through those motions in your head. That way, hopefully, when it comes time, you have that positive mental image to look back on, saying, "Oh, I've already done this." Imagery scripts are one things that I do too, and that's basically picking a specific moment that I'm trying to prime my athlete with. So I'll use a basketball example, buzzer beater, right? 3, 2, 1, here comes the shot, right? If I want them to be primed and mentally ready for that scenario, I'm gonna be envisioning and giving them a script and then rehearsing that to them in kind of like a meditation way. So what that would look like is um, I'm gonna give an example of a script too to kind of go through it, but painting out as specific as you can what the crowd is doing, what your defenders look like, um, how you feel physically and mentally in that moment, everything like that, all into one script, and then having that to say to my athletes so that way when it comes time, they've already been in that situation and they know how to react because they've already mentally rehearsed it. So bear with me, and you're probably like, why is there a lemon on the screen? We're talking about sports, but I use this example all the time to kind of give an idea of how in-depth imagery can be and how to create those pictures. So there's something that I use. It's called a lemon imagery script, which I'm going to bring up right now, and I'm going to take you guys through it. So bear with me. It's 2 paragraphs. Try to get comfy and calm and really get your little imagery hats on. And I'm going to read through it and see if you guys can kind of get that idea of that mental image and then see how it could be translated over into sport. So I would like you to imagine that you are standing in your kitchen or the kitchen of someone you know. In front of you is a cutting board. Next to the cutting board is a good sharp knife. Take a few moments to imagine the knife, imagine the kitchen, the color of the countertops, the appliances, the cupboards. Notice if there are windows, and so on. Also notice any kitchen smells or sounds, the running of the dishwasher or the hum of a refrigerator, or the sound of a clock on the wall. Take some time to notice everything, using all of your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, how you feel being there in that kitchen. Now imagine that on the cutting board sits a plump, fresh, juicy lemon. In your mind, hold the lemon in one hand, feeling its weight and textures. Then place it back on the board and carefully cut it in half with the knife. Feel the resistance to the knife and how it gives way as the lemon splits. Notice the pale yellow of the pulp, the whiteness of the inner peel, and see whether you can cut through a seed or two. Carefully cut one of the halves in two. Notice where a drop or two of juice has purled on the surface of one of the quarters. Now imagine lifting this lemon wedge to your mouth, smelling the fresh, sharp scent. Now bite into the sour, juicy lemon. So that's an idea. Everyone can come back to it. Hopefully you followed along. Um, that's an idea of how detailed and descriptive I want it to be when it comes to kind of describing if you were to try an imagery script, just because you could really create that image. Hopefully for the people that were following along, maybe you are able to picture the kitchen, picture yourself cutting through the knife, cutting through the lemon with the knife. Maybe at the end when I said, sour, juicy lemon, you like physically puckered your lips or felt something with taste. The same neural pathways are working. And if you translate that over to a sporting context, it could really help your athletes become prepared for those different moments that may happen. So our next skill, and one of my favorites, one of coach's favorites, I always think, goal setting, right? We all have different goals for ourselves. Many people always set goals. It provides a clear direction, enhances motivation, gives people like a direction to go with, and kind of helps build a culture of a team. Um, Three main kinds that I want to talk about today, and you guys might have heard of them, but outcome, performance, and process are the three main kinds. Outcome is that big picture goals, which a lot of the kids that I work with normally give me right at the jump. I want to be the best. I want to be MVP. I want to have a championship ring. Those are your outcome. Performance are those measured goals with a time frame in place. So maybe that would look like I'll go basketball with it again. I want to make X amount of free throws every day. That way, when it comes time by the end of the season, my free throw percentage is up 2%. Really specific. Process goals, and these are my favorite. Small daily goals to help shape your performance goals and lead to the outcome. So these are those small wins every day that kind of help slowly build up to that big outcome goal. These are the ones that I always stress to coaches and kids to focus on the most. So why, right? So, and how do we do that? Small process goals help kind of create that fulfillment. Sometimes with such a big overhead goal like winning a championship, our motivation kind of gets lost along the way. So having those small goals of maybe it's just, I want to work out 2 times or 3 times a week, right? Small, small goals and naming those. Um, that way you can feel a little bit of fulfillment and motivation during the process. So this is my challenge for you guys listening, whether you're an athlete or a coach, naming those small wins, right? So what did I do good today in practice? What made today a good day? What am I proud of that I did today? What do I need to work on? Easy, boom, boom, boom. Go through them all. Having each athlete set their own, right? Because not every athlete has the same goals for each other. As a coach, I know coaches are probably cringing thinking of trying to go through um, all their kids on the teams or having small goals themselves, but I promise the more tailored to that athlete, the better it will feel for themselves while they're slowly checking them off. Um, Hitting those small goals over time, like I said in this last point right here, kind of creates that confidence and builds that confidence over time, rather than just focusing on we need to go to nationals, we need to win the championship, which are great goals, but how do we get there? And how do we get that fulfillment during? I threw on down here SMART too, and this is something that's kind of used in businesses as well, but specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So if you are going to set some of those goals in between that I talked about, if it's, whether it's just your process goals that I'm talking about, or your performance or your outcome, try to tailor it to that SMART dynamic. That way you can really pinpoint and make it feel like it is attainable, it is relevant to our work today. You can measure it and see it change over time and set a time frame for it to kind of apply the pressure. Arousal control. So this one's one of my favorites. And when I say the word arousal, I want you guys to think anxiety. We just use arousal control more so because it's a little bit broader. But arousal is that level of alertness, activation, anxiety in athletes. I feel like a lot of us have had this experience as well. So my work with arousal control is kind of pinpointing where that perfect zone is and how do we get you there faster and how do we get you there more consistently. So below, this looks, hopefully it's not too scary looking, but that's called the individual zones of optimal functioning. So it's also called the eyes-off theory, if anyone's ever heard of it. That highlighted zone is maximum performance. So that is interchangeable. You guys might have heard it's a buzzword, right? So flow state. You guys might have heard of that. When you're not thinking at all, everything's coming easy. You kind of like go into a fugue mode where you're going through the motions. And then when you're out of it, you're like, wow, that was awesome. How do I get back there? That's kind of part of my job too, is kind of pinpointing how do we get back to that zone. And looking at the graph, right? So poor performance, good performance on that y-axis. On that x, we have the level of arousal. Too much, not enough anxiety, not enough arousal, right? You're not gonna ever get to that challenge point in that flow state because you're not challenged enough. So you're not never going to get to that point. Too much challenge, too much anxiety. We go past that point and actually decrease in performance. So that's basically what this thing is saying. How do we combat that? This is one of the big ones that I always say to my athletes, and I always drill in breathing techniques, breathing techniques, breathing techniques, because the really cool thing about breathing is it's something that we can control and something that you can feel instantly. These are two of the options that I teach my kids a bunch all the time because they're easy and they stick in your head. What this is doing for you physiologically is when you're in that mode of maybe going past that point, um, thinking of a pot, right? Like the water's about to boil over, right? That fight or flight, that drop in performance. Breathing techniques allow you to kind of control your own heart rate and bring you back down to a better state of calm. And that could be do or die when you're in a game, right? Maybe it's right before you make a mistake. Maybe it's before you flip out and yell at someone. Maybe it's before you get a foul, you know what I mean? Or a card or something like that. This could be the difference, and it's cool because you could do it in game, or you can implement it in a routine. Coaches, maybe before when you call a timeout or there's in between, maybe you just let your kids take a second, breathe, and then give them feedback and kind of go about this. Box breathing is the first one, and I think this one's really common. A lot of people have heard about, but I love it because it's so visual. And a lot of kids can just trace the box and breathe. So 4 seconds, inhaling, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and then holding for 4. And you repeat that as many times as you can. My challenge for you guys watching right now is if you want to try one of these two skills, I'll get to the second one, but try it. And I promise you, just a couple breaths and repetitions of this, you'll feel physically calmer. And hopefully, this isn't a stressful zone or state, but imagine, if you feel a sense of calm now, just on Zoom, how that can be translated over into practice or in a game in a different situation. It could be do or die. So, try the box breathing for anyone, or if you want something quicker, some athletes are like, I don't want to do the hold and all that. So there's an easier one, but it's called 3-3-6. So inhaling for 3, holding for 3, out for 6. The main thing on both of these that I want to stress when you do try it is that slow exhale, because that slow exhale is what brings your heart rate back down to normal. And it kind of fights with that fight or flight emotions and that boiling point, like I said, in that pot of water, right? Your amygdala kind of goes into that fight or flight way. If you control your heart rate by breathing, then it will slowly go back down. So, breathing techniques, breathing techniques. I preach these all the time. Attention. So, attention is another one of these skills, right? So, working on focusing under pressure is switching zones. So, this is going to look a little confusing on the side, but I'm going to break it down for you guys. This is called the Niederfer model of attention. So, broad, narrow, and then internal and external. When I say internal and external, that means internal meaning all in here, all in your head. External is everything outside. So background, everything, teams, coaches, crowds, all that stuff. Broad and narrow is just the focus and attention you give it. So broad focus, maybe you're watching everyone else on the field move. Narrow is you specifically locking in and focusing how you're gonna receive a pass or something like that. A lot of the kids that I have with attention issues, it's when they get stuck in one of these zones. Sometimes we have a hard time switching out, right? We're too internal. We can't focus on anything external. Um, and in each of these zones, so broad external, when you're assessing, sometimes you're assessing too much information. It's called information overload. So you're taking in all this information at once as an athlete and you don't know what to do with it. That's information overload, and you can't really switch out of that zone. The analysis piece, that's tunnel vision. You're over analyzing something that you lose the sense of focus from everything else because you're so locked in to that one thing. The act portion, so paralysis by analysis, if some people have said that. So you're analyzing too many things at once that you're almost paralyzed. And then the preparation is sometimes is kind of it's in that internal zone, right? So you're prepping so much that you kind of ruminate and get lost in that thought process. So my work with these kids is kind of helping them try to switch out of these different zones, and kind of lock into where they need to be. So one of the things that I do a lot and that I'm giving to you guys is I use this grounding technique all the time. I don't know if anyone's watching. Um, is a Inside Out 2 fan, but Riley at the end of Inside Out 2 actually uses this message when she's in that state of panic. Um, and it's really simple. It sounds silly, but it switches that from if you're all stuck in here, like if you're having a tough day, maybe things aren't going your way, you know what I mean? Oh, I'm having a terrible practice. I'm a terrible player. Like you're stuck in that thought process. using this grounding technique, it will help switch out of from in here to what's going on around you and kind of being more present. So what that would look like is using these senses again, right? Feeling present in that moment. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And I promise you, when you get to the end of that, you know, whether you're doing it individually or as a team, going through this technique will switch that state of mind, and hopefully you're not so much in here because you're just focused on everything that's around you. Coaches too, if you, this is one thing you could do with one of your kids if you see them start to get into that spiral zone. Self-talk, this is probably the one I work with the most with all my athletes. Young kids have a really, really critical self-talk. It's your internal dialogue with yourself. Working on your self-talk, kind of creating a positive tone, it not only increases your overall mood, but also your belief in abilities and your overall confidence and just the overall feeling you get around things, your confidence going into different things. There's three main types in 2 different categories. So spontaneous would be more reactive. So self-talk that came all of a sudden because of a certain situation. Goal-driven is more so um, I need to do this. I need to do that. Having a specific goal. Positive, negative, which are probably the two we know the most, with examples there, and also instructional, giving yourself instruction during self-talk. Self-talk is the one I talk about probably the most because we get into such a bad habit with it, because we talk about ourselves in such a negative tone because no one else hears it. And we'll kind of get onto that in the next one. This is an activity I do all the time with different athletes that I meet with. So I challenge you guys to kind of take yourself through it too. I always sit down with an athlete if they're struggling kind of with their confidence and kind of hearing about what their self-talk would be in these different situations and just identify a couple I am statements. I have an example here. I am making stupid decisions, something that people say all the time. Um, Having them list a couple of those. Then changing that I am to you are. So it'd be like, you are making stupid decisions. And then I have them say it to me if they're meeting with me. If you guys were to do this activity, saying it to a neighbor, or if your coaches asked you to do this, having yourself say it to a coach. And then most of the time I get the, oh God, no, I don't want to say it. And then I ask, well, why? And they say, well, it doesn't feel good to say to someone else. And that's kind of the piece I want to kind of come with it, that awareness, that feeling kind of gets hidden because it becomes so habitual for us that we kind of look past it. But if we can't say it to someone else or a teammate, a coach, we shouldn't be saying it to ourselves and kind of creating that habit of it. It's a hard habit to break, but once we could kind of get baby steps into it, the easier it will become. So that's the first piece of it. And then also reframing it. So, right, we're not stuck in just with the you are making stupid decisions. Change it, change that thought, force that change, break that habit. So, I have the example I can't change my past bad decisions, but I can focus on making the next one a good one. Getting rid of the past. The past is in the past. We can't change it. We can't control it, but we can verbalize and say that the next one's going to be good. Practicing that, reframing it. Maybe you write down the negative statements you heard pop up during practice and just go through changing them when you get home. But slowly chipping away at that bad habit, easier said than done. The words you say become the house you live in, right? So try to make your house, your head, right, an easier place, a more forgiving place, a more positive place, because at the end of the day, it's just you and yourself, you versus you out there when you get onto the field, the court, wherever it will be. This is one thing I like to give a little insight to too. Self-determination theory. We have 3 basic psychological needs. And I always try to list these to coaches if they're always like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to give to my kids. Check yourself on kind of some of these 3 categories. So I'll go through them. So it's competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence is just the experience of mastery and being effective in one's activity. So A lot of these kids are looking for, seeing that they belong, seeing that they're able to conquer different skills. So seeing that where that aligns in your practice. Autonomy is being given that choice and being heard. So maybe if it's, you're split on what drill to do next or what you want to do for a practice plan or something like that, let the kids decide. You know what I mean? That might be a little scary for people, but try it out because the more you let the kids be heard, the more they're going to feel involved. Relatedness, right? At the end of the day, we're all human, and noticing that some kids aren't going to have the best days, and that's okay. No one's going to be 100% every single day, but if you continue to show up consistently, giving whatever percent you have that day, um, and having them be supported during that time, then that's great. So that all those kind of combine into how to help one stay motivated. So even if you're an athlete too and you're looking at these different things, it's where am I lacking in the support? What do I need to work on? Where do I need more latedness? Do I need to voice my opinion more? Kind of comes all back down to this. And I'm a big quotes person. If you guys, I know you guys are just meeting me, but so I want to leave you with this one because it really embodies what I want to do with mental skills and kind of putting all these things together. It's not going to get easier, and I feel like a lot of people that come to me think, oh, these situations are going to be easier now that I'm working and doing mental skills and putting in those reps. And it's not necessarily that, but we're learning how to handle that hard better. So making yourself that person who handles hard well. That could be the separation and the difference when, you go out to these different recruiting things and a hard situation is thrown at you, seeing how the other kids react to it, but then you being more mentally prepped and rehearsed and kind of have different outlets to get yourself through it. That could be the different stepping stone, right, to getting that recognition that you want. So keep that in mind while you guys are going through hopefully some of the different techniques or checking in on some of the skills that we talked about today. And that is basically my little deep dive into mental skills. This is a QR code right directly to the McKaylee Center website. If anyone's interested as an athlete or anyone's interested maybe as a coach or have a player in mind, scan that code and it will bring you right to our booking page. For myself and Kelsey, right now it's just me because Kelsey's on maternity leave. But I'd love to help anyone in any way that I can at the Waltham and Norwood sites, and I also do virtual work as well. But other than that, hopefully everyone got that scanned, and then just some questions. I'm excited to see what you guys got for me, so don't be afraid.
One of the first questions was, this was amazing. Will the recording be shared? Yes, the recording will be sent out to all the participants, and if anyone wasn't able to make it tonight, it will also be sent out to their email as well.
Awesome. So we have one question that came in regarding different age levels. So how might some of the techniques that you shared be adjusted to suit more of the younger population? So for example, like under 10 years old, that type of population versus more of like the high school age that might be more focused on like recruiting and next steps in terms of skill there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. I think the skills themselves don't necessarily have to change, but the language that you use and approach them, that's what we have to change around. I'll give you an example. So, for breathing techniques, right? Maybe when I go up to an 8-year-old and I tell them to do box breathing, they're going to look at me like I have three heads, right? So, what I'd say is still focusing on that exhale, like I said, is that's the main point I want to take. So how would I word that to a younger age group, right? So changing the breathing technique just a little bit with that emphasis. So it would look like, I always say, smell the roses and blow out the candles, right? So we're gonna smell the roses for 3 and blow out the candles for 6. That way they can visualize it and have a, it's not necessarily a box where they have to remember to inhale and hold, but they have common experiences that it can use. So the language around it, whether it's goal setting too for something like, oh, what do you want to accomplish today? Kind of just changing the language around it, and navigating how it would best fit them so they can understand.
Great. Kind of branching off of that, and tailoring different techniques and skills. Is there any type of baseline, metric or benchmark that you use in terms of like measuring an athlete's growth over time? I know
Yeah,
obviously everybody is different and it's an individual experience.
that's a great question too. I feel like there's so many different scales and measurements that you can use as a practitioner. It's just more so what you necessarily want to be measured. If you're looking for something specific to get like a numerical value and see that increase, there's different confidence scales, there's different self-efficacy scales on how that could increase. For me myself, I honestly, this is probably bad, but I don't really like the numbers. I like to just go off of the experiences they give me and the feedback. I'm more so of like sit down and tell me about it and kind of break me through what's been going on and walk me through that process, kind of like storytelling rather than the number side of things. But there's definitely scales too. I like to do it more so maybe if I'm working with a team, um, and kind of record where they're at the beginning and then kind of measure, confidence towards the end or just implementation of skills at the end too.
That's great insight. This is speaking a little bit just to your own experience as an athlete playing in college. Was there anything specific that you shared with the group tonight that helped you personally get out of your slump? Or what, I guess, advice could you give to your younger self now looking back?
Ooh, I love that question. I ask that one all the time to my athletes, and they're like, "Ew, I don't want to talk to my younger self," but it's great to do. So, thank you for that one. For myself, I think it was honestly the self-talk. I kept saying statements to myself like, "I'm never gonna get out of this." You know, this is just the player I am now, and I kind of created that narrative that that's just who I am now. Like I'm just a worse player. Um, which is not the reality of it. I was just going through a tough time. And I think when I got that break from COVID, kind of challenging myself to be more positive and realize that I'm not stuck in that slump at all. And at the end of the day, this sport's supposed to be fun for me. So how do I find that? And kind of navigating those pieces of it, kind of goal setting a tad bit too of what makes me feel fulfilled that day. Um, and kind of feel productive, slowly built back my confidence, I think, to the point where I was able to get out of that slump.
That's great. And just in terms of getting out of slumps and finding that internal, external motivation, how do you motivate accordingly? So a question came when with, every athlete is going to have their own strengths and weaknesses. How do you know how to motivate a particular athlete the right way?
Yeah, great question. I think having that conversation almost from the jump with your team. One thing I like to do for the teams that I work with for motivation is kind of finding out each of their whys, right? Their motivation that I kind of talked about. I talked about mine for getting into this field, but doing that almost with the team and with your athletes individually and seeing what their intrinsic drive is, what's their motivation, and kind of tailoring it to that. A lot of people say, well, I just like to win. That's great, but you know, the reality of it is like eventually there might be a loss in there. So what happens then? So I think kind of catering it towards each person and seeing what that intrinsic value is to them, because at the end of the day, the intrinsic value is the only thing that's not going to change.
That's a great point. And in terms of, I know you covered a bunch of different skills that athletes can implement at all different levels, all ages. Um, I know numbers are just only a little piece of that pie. But is there, a standard that you live by between how long the techniques might, take to get those reps in before they start, not working per se, but the athletes start to kind of notice those differences in their performance and their overall mental.
Yeah, that's also a great question. I normally, when I implement a skill in or try to suggest something with an athlete that I'm meeting with, I normally give them that information and then try to hold them accountable because at the end of the day, I could only give you as much information, but you have to try to implement it in as much as you can. So I kind of throw you off into the deep end to kind of sit with it, and then from there, we normally reconnect maybe in 2 weeks and kind of go from there. So I'd say when I've seen the most, I'd say honestly, so I meet with athletes probably every 2 weeks. I'd say maybe on like that third session. So we're looking at maybe like 6 weeks in. So what is that, like maybe 2 months? Which sounds crazy, but to have such a drastic change in mentality and habits, I'd say right around that 6 week mark, you'll start to see yourself. And as you start to slowly do it, it becomes routine as you go out throughout the weeks too. So you'll actually find it to be easier, and maybe you're not having to, drill it in and be more aware of it because it just happens naturally.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I know you talked a lot about dealing with internal, external pressures, and both of kind of the natures of arousal that come with that. So we obviously live in an age where as things get more intense in terms of, a level you're playing at, a team you're playing for, there can be a lot of outside noise. So whether it's coming from parents, relatives, friends, coaches, anyone kind of in that external crowd.
Mm.
While a lot of it can be positive, I know some can be negative at times for players to hear. So how do you suggest they kind of deal with that stuff mentally?
Mentally, I'd say really figuring out what you want as an athlete. I feel like a lot of the times your opinions can get really strayed on, whether you want, your post to look good on Instagram because you want to go, D1, which is always what everyone wants, right? Or now you have a whole different ball game with NIL and receiving money and kind of having that piece of it as well. So, um, there's a lot of different voices, but the only one that you should really listen to is yourself and your gut. So I'd say taking time with yourself, and whether it's journaling, maybe you just put up your camera and start talking to it a little bit of kind of what you want to get out of it. That way, through the noise, um, your reasonings behind it. And then I'd also say maybe if the noise does become too much, isolating and kind of playing damage control in different ways. Maybe you set a timer on your apps. Maybe you delete your apps for a week and go dark for a little bit, which sounds terrifying for a lot of the youth athletes that I work with, probably, but maybe it's that break you need. And kind of just figuring out having that time alone with yourself to really figure out what you want and limit the distractors as much as possible.
Great. And are there any specific trends or techniques that you find between working with both male and female players that tend to translate better or worse?
That's interesting. Honestly, I haven't. Um, but I thought I was going to. In college, I worked with only female teams. Um, and it came easy to me because I grew up as a female in that sporting environment. So I was able to kind of implement my own experience in. So when it came to working with males, I was a little hesitant on whether it would be received just as well. Um, but I feel like the males that I've worked with almost maybe even buy in more because normally when it gets to that point of them being willing to show this kind of, I wouldn't say vulnerable side, but interest in that mental game, because the mental side's not really talked about for men. If they're willing to put themselves out there and be motivated to kind of work on that side of the game, they're already bought into most of those things. So honestly, the way I deliver between men and women hasn't really changed for the skills, which I think is kind of awesome. But yeah, at least in my experience, I haven't had anything different between the two.
Great. And we got a couple questions specifically geared towards navigating your athlete going through these challenges from a parenting perspective. So I know, a game or a practice is only, 1 or 2 hours of the day, but if an athlete goes home and just wanting to know how a parent can best support their athlete if they're navigating something that's taxing on their brain mentally.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say letting them, the one thing that I hear a bunch, at least working with the athletes that I do, a lot of them are so worried about the car ride after a bad game, right? I've had an athlete literally say to me, I'd rather jump out of the moving car than get into the car with my parents after a game, which I'm like, please don't do that. And that's crazy. But that's how it is for these kids. They don't want to hear some things because most of the time they know. So if they're going through, that's just an example for a bad game, but if they're going through kind of that negative, um, whether it's a slump, remember, maybe it was just a bad performance. If it was a bad performance, I'd say almost let them soak in those emotions for a little bit, be angry about it, and try not to talk to it the day, maybe talk about it the day of, and see how you can be of help the next day, whether they want to, you know, go back to practice and help them be positive, creating that positive language yourselves and kind of between um, the parents and the athlete too. Because I think enforcing it from the jump between the both of you can kind of tailor over and make that habit easier for the kid too. Giving them their space to feel, like I said, and then also knowing that there's sources out there if they do get stuck in that. So if you feel like you're not competent enough, that there are services like myself out there that can kind of help them from a different perspective, if they are really stuck in that hard time and it's not just, a couple bad practices, a couple bad plays.
Excellent. And this next question hits home. I was a college soccer player myself, so this one's recruiting focused. What's your biggest piece of advice on just from your experience doing sports psychology and mental performance work? What's your biggest piece of advice for any athlete that might be going through the recruiting process now?
Yeah. Recruiting process, I think, is probably one of the biggest stressors I see from my athletes from like I want to say almost like eighth grade to like junior year. So definitely a big stressor. I think establishing a set stone plan of what you want when you're looking at different schools. So whether, major wise, division wise, skill level, having those things in place. So if you're lucky enough to have all that attention kind of coming at you, you could kind of start to narrow down um already kind of what you're looking for. If it's the flip side of things and you're not really getting the attention that you're looking for or the recruitment you think you deserve, um I would say seeing your situation, going through it and seeing either what can I do to kind of goal set and fit those different recruitment things that are going to get you looked at, I guess I'd say from the coaches, and then making sure you're going to the right places to get kind of seen, which is also kind of hard. Recruitment's such a iffy thing, but I think the biggest thing also is support. You need support during it, whether it's from parents, friends, someone else that's also going through it, having that support that you could kind of, whether, maybe they don't even know, using Molly's example, like soccer, right? Maybe they don't even know that much about soccer, but someone that you could kind of just like shoot your ideas back and forth, tell you how you feel, and kind of use that as a directive kind of through the process. Also, just accepting that it might be chaotic or it might be dead silent sometimes, and kind of seeing that everyone's recruitment process is very different, but at the end of the day, you will get through it. A lot of people get through it, and hopefully it's just in that right outlook that you want.
That's great advice. And even looking back on my own recruitment experience, everything truly does happen for a reason. At the end of the day, you end up where you're supposed to. So all those stressful moments, I swear they will pay off in the end. A couple last questions coming from a coaching perspective. So how might you get a team's buy-in for really taking this time and investing into the mental side of performance when, soccer itself is so focused on physical. So, benchmarks such as, how fast you can run, how far you can kick a ball, what's your shot accuracy, things like that. How can you really get the team to buy into to to taking the time to invest on the mental side of the game?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like my entire field is trying to help people try to buy into this, and I think, you know, mental skills is slowly starting to get more recognition. At the, there's mental performance positions now at, you know, the highest professional levels down to Division 1. D3s are starting to have it. Mental coaches are getting looked at for these high athletes during the recruitment process. So I'd say one, if they don't believe in it, kind of showing them the level of athletes that kind of do buy into it. Sometimes seeing, whether it's like a role model of theirs and then seeing that they do it, be like, oh, maybe I should do that too. Two, I think, is also just seeing, um, thinking about it from a perspective. We always talk about, preach about mental health, right, too, and mental health is a huge part of it. But if we're always working on our body, if we could prep our mind too, I think looking at it from that recruitment standpoint, if you could give yourself a little leg up in the recruiting process or just to help yourself overall as a player, then why not try it and just give it a chance and see if there's something that really sticks with you and can help you. So I think just helping them maybe create that optimistic thing. Yeah, all the people that I work with, they don't have to come back in for another session once you have that first session. Um, and I'm never gonna force it on anyone. So it's whether something really clicks with you and kind of sticks with you, and having that advantage on that mental side, I think is a kind of really cool thing that's needed, especially now at the youth level. So I'd say modeling it with the higher ups and showing that there's other people doing these things and it's working. You could get research with it too, but kids aren't probably going to like the research side of things. So I'd say maybe six more so with different athletes that have used it. And then also just looking at it from the standpoint of if you could better yourself as an athlete, why not try it?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Like even just trying a technique, getting a couple reps in it, just like a drill at practice that you've never done before.
Exactly.
Why not just try it, see if it pays off, and most of the times you'll find the benefit. Another question that did come in recently was just teaching athletes how to deal with negative self-talk, but specifically related to, in a high pressure game, things are intense. It could be tied up with a couple minutes left. The opposing team starts chirping back and forth, saying something. Or is there any tips that you give athletes to deal with that, like negative self-talk coming directly from an opposing player?
Yeah, definitely. You see that a lot, definitely in sports. One thing that I do, I haven't touched upon it in this presentation, but you could look it up after kind of how to do it or reach out to me about it, but it's called attentional cues. So for me, when I see that issue, the first thing I'm thinking about is instead of focusing on that negative self-talk, well, actually, I'm thinking two things. So instead of focusing more on the talk itself, bringing down that frustration that comes with it. So that's where the breathing could come in too, with that arousal control, because it's obviously they're trying to um egg you on and kind of get you outside of your game. So if you could kind of stay in that present zone, and stay grounded in that present moment, you could kind of limit the attention distractors around you. And then the other one that I use is also attentional cues. So something to kind of drive your attention from that external to maybe something internal. So, or one of the things that I use a lot with athletes, or they tell me that kind of works, is they have a go-to song to use to distract themselves. So if someone was starting to talk negatively about the other team, they'd start singing a song in their head to distract themselves from what they're saying and kind of pull themselves away from that area, that attention before they got to that mode of uh, being overly frustrated and kind of absorbing what they're saying.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of my favorite quotes to live by, even you can apply it to athletics, but just life in general, is can't control the winds, but you can always adjust the sails. So really just controlling those controllables, focusing on what's internal within yourself that you can focus on at that moment. Um, so your advice directly relates to that. I think it's great. Let me take a look at some of our last questions that we might have. I know we're hitting an hour. Um, a couple come in from just the parent perspective on how they can best help their athlete that's dealing with something. Um, and one specifically is related to, a parent might be, like you said, some of those car rides can be difficult after a game if the last thing that a young athlete wants to hear is, yapping from a parent about, what could have went right, what could have went wrong in the game. As a coach, is there any way that they can kind of step in and give the parent some advice on how to deal with that negative self-talk that they might be giving?
Yeah. In the car ride specifically or just in general?
Just in general.
Um, I think it's as a parent, it becomes really hard because sometimes no matter what you start to say to the kid, they're immediately gonna react. And I think that the first thing I would do is, as a parent, is please don't take it personally because it happens all the time with different kids, of all different backgrounds. So I think please don't take it personally if they do lash out. Most of the time, if they do lash out in those moments, it's because they're still trying to navigate what's going on inside of them and it's just a projection. So I think the biggest thing I would say, I really stand by the let them sit in the silence a little bit. So if it is an example for like a car ride, not speaking, I mean sometimes like not talking about the game, just having a normal conversation. Your kid might be a little weirded out at first that if you're silent and maybe freak them out a little bit more, but that silence kind of gives them the time to go through the emotions that they're kind of confused of to begin with. And like I said, the most of the time they already know what they did wrong, so as soon as someone else brings it up, they're immediately going to snap. So I'd say sometimes knowing when or when not to kind of dive into that. And then if they're still stuck in that negative state, I think that's when the check-in can come in and that supportive side and that social support can kind of come in from the parent side.
Yeah, that's great advice. Definitely important, I think, to let the dust settle a little bit.
Mhm.
I know emotions can get crazy at times, but that's great advice coming from your side. I think that about wraps it up in terms of questions. Jamie, feel free to interject if anything to add at the last bit here.
No, I think this has been great, and I don't see any additional questions in the chat box besides just great job, Amanda, and thank you for all your advice and educational help tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. This was my pleasure.
Perfect.